wildlife control consultant and Pest podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Vantassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here.
Hi everyone, Stephen Vantassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife Podcast as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Glad to have you along today. We hope you're enjoying the podcast, and if you're new to our show, welcome. I'd like to have you take a few moments, if you could, if you like the show, give us a like down below, and also if you can subscribe and join me, of course, on I have a blog as well on wildlifecontrolconsultant.com. You can check that out as well, and you'll get some timely information that's published sometimes once a week. It's been a little slow lately because I've been involved in some other, going back to college again and getting some more education, but generally you'll be coming out once a week. Sometimes it's once every 2 weeks, so you're not going to be filled with emails from me, but I try to touch on different topics that are going to be sometimes out of the usual. So, but as I said, if you've listened to some of my earlier podcasts, if you are just looking at what's going to make you money right now, right this second, this is probably not your show. I think that there's a lot more information out there that we need to be broadening our our understanding of, in that you get that background so that when a issue comes up, you have that background to address it. We do talk about things that will make you money, but it's not always directed to applying it right now, right today. We're trying to broaden your knowledge so that you can become the pest geek expert that we all should strive to be. So it's a little bit different focus here in terms of our podcast. All right, enough about that. One more thing. If you have ideas, questions, you have maybe a product or idea you want to put out on the show, definitely drop me a line at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. You have ideas for the show. Perhaps you want to be on the show and talk about your product or a service that you're providing, or maybe something's just been on your mind and you want to try to reach a larger audience. We do interviews here on the Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife. So reach out. I'd love to chat with you and perhaps arrange something. So definitely drop me an email. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about research. And I'm not talking about research where you are hitting the books per se, or doing the Google Scholar search and that sort of thing. No, I'm talking about the hands-on field research that we really need more of to sort of advance our industry. And so one of the pet peeves of mine is that when we're talking about wildlife biologists, the vast majority of research is being done in what I would call, like the Yellowstone model. In other words, they're doing research where the animal is in its native habitat and they're kind of out there doing their experiencing nature. And I'm not opposed to that sort of research. I mean, I think that has to be done. Unfortunately for us in the wildlife control industry, we need research about animals and their behavior in urban and human impacted environments. So yeah, it's great if a biologist is out there studying, deer or raccoons in their native habitat, but we need information about how animals are acting and behaving in an urban habitat. And because we need to understand, are there better ways for us to perform our tasks? For example, what are the best ways to exclude raccoons from climbing buildings, for instance? That's kind of a tough one. I mean, I have my ideas. I mean, you may have your ideas, but do we have anything that has been researched over a wide spectrum of areas? How deep do you need to go to create good trench screening, for example, to keep out skunks or woodchucks? Does it matter what part of the country you're in? I mean, I usually tell people, look, dig a trench 2 inches deep. You're like, what? 2 inches deep? Well, yeah, because it's not the depth of the screen that matters. It's how far away from the building it goes. Because what difference does it make if an animal digs down 2 feet before it hits the L part of? Let me put my get my image up here for you. If it hits the L here, what difference does it make whether it's 2 feet down or whether it's 2 inches down? The animal doesn't know the difference. So what's the problem? So I quite don't understand why that's an issue here. So, but some people said if you have it too shallow, the frost heaves bring it up to the surface. Now, that may be true. I don't know. I didn't live in the northern tier of the United States until I moved here to Montana, and I'm not doing trend screening while I'm out here. But so that would be some of the questions that we would need to ask. We would need to ask as well. I mean, there's some theories out there. Are some squirrels having 3 litters, for instance? I've heard that kind of bandied about. Well, anyways, I have a list of sort of research questions that are useful for the wildlife control industry, and I've posted them up on my wildlifecontrolconsultant.com website. But the point is that those types of projects aren't the ones getting funded. And it's kind of sad, and we need that to change. But in the meantime, there are occasions when wildlife biologists are doing work that intersects our industry. So how do you, as a wildlife control professional, assist with that if you're interested? And I certainly hope you are. I've only been involved in a couple of projects. One that I was involved in back in Massachusetts was a pretty low energy, low task requirement. Basically what they were doing is they were doing a survey of raccoons to see how much raccoon roundworm, I believe it, or there might have been their parasite load they had. So all they required us to do is to save the raccoons, and when they came around, they would come and pick them up. Well, that's pretty easy. It was sitting in my freezer anyways, and it saved me 50 cents a pound to get them cremated. So I'm like, yeah, I'm in. And that was a way to participate in that particular project by making it easy for the researchers to collect the information, to collect the data, which was the dead raccoons. Well, that is probably the easiest and lowest level of participation in wildlife research. And I don't want to demean it, and I don't want to diminish it, because it is important, and that saves researchers a lot of time, saves them a lot of money, because grant funds, even though you think that the government's just throwing out money all over the place, well, in many ways it is, it often doesn't come to the things that we're interested in, right? It usually goes to other types of junk. But in any event, when it comes to this wildlife research, we want to be sure that we help these wildlife biologists get that information, and that's an easy way to do that. Are there other types of research that can be done? Well, yeah, you can help, as I've already said, in terms of carcasses. But if you're wanting to take your help to another level, and that is where you're helping with the actual collection of the research. So we've already mentioned that one way you can help for certain studies is giving wildlife biologists the carcasses. The next level is actually going out there and recording the information that's appropriate to their research. Let me explain. For example, let's say the researcher, like with the BMP, for example, right? The best management practices for traps, that they would have fur trappers they would have some brief training about the protocols of the study. That's important. You have to follow the steps, and then they would have the trappers go out and do their trapping, and they would have another individual go along with them to sort of record the information. That's where you, as a wildlife control operator, in that case it was fur trappers, were performing the actual study, doing the actual work, rather than doing it as a sideline of your activity. A lot more time involved, a higher level of commitment. You've got to follow the protocol, and I can't emphasize that enough. So it's a burden on you. I'll be blunt. If you're going to be doing that level of help, it's a burden because you're going to be working at a slower pace than what you would be if you weren't participating in the research study. So not only is the research study constricting in terms of you can do this, you can't do that. For example, if the research study was on 2 different types of traps, you can't use a third trap because that would ruin the study. If the research is on 2 different traps and they tell you you have to use these two traps, you have to use those 2 traps. You can't just say, well, this would be a better trap to use here and grab it. No, that's not part of the study. So that can be really irritating for people because a lot of trappers are high production individuals, they're high energy people, and they're very task oriented. They just want to sort of rack up the numbers, and that's what makes them who they are. But when you're dealing with a research project, you can't break protocol. That is, you have to follow the rules. And I'm kind of passionate about this because I was a sponsor, or I should say a principal, in a research project dealing with raccoon eviction fluid. And I was able to get a hold of some wildlife control operators who said that they were going to assist me in performing this study. And what we did was we had 3 different products. We had water, we had wildlife control supplies eviction fluid, and then we had Rob Erickson's eviction fluid. And we wrote up the instructions, and so they were supposed to use these items in chimneys where females with young were resident. And the protocol required that you would pour a little bit of the fluid down the chimney, and then you would smear some along, I believe, the top of the chimney, and then check in a couple of days to see if the female left or not. That was it. Well, I had wildlife control operators. It was almost like they didn't understand English. It was that bad. I had one person write back to me, "Oh, well, I knew the control was water, so I just tossed that." And I used these other things, and yeah, I had some success. That's useless. So rather than getting a sample size of what we were looking to get a sample size of about, I believe, 100 cases. So you'd have about 33 of the water, 33 of wildlife control supplies, eviction fluid, and 33 of Rob Erickson's, and then be able to compare them to see which one was more effective than the other, or whether there was any effect at all. The whole study got screwed up because one trapper said, "Oh, well, I knew it was water, so I didn't use that." Well, the whole purpose of the water was to see if just the mere fact that liquid was being poured down a chimney and human presence caused the raccoon to flee. And you want to know what? Sometimes it did cause the raccoon to flee. Now, we didn't have a large enough sample size to be statistically significant. And you can listen to one of my previous podcasts to learn about that. So it screwed up the whole study. Not just with one guy. He wasn't alone. There are other people that, "Oh, well, I was too busy. I didn't want to do it." So I had commitments from one company that was doing a lot of work. And then right when we were about ready to launch, they pulled out. And so I lost all those possibilities as well. So to be blunt here, if you want to participate in a research project to help further advance the information for our industry, God bless you. But I want you to understand that don't just simply look for the backslapping. Look for the backslapping after you finish the work and that you do it correctly. Otherwise, don't volunteer. If you're not serious about this, don't volunteer. Don't put your wildlife biologist through that pain. Don't do it, because you're just going to make their life miserable, and you're going to blow through a lot of time and effort and possibly money that could be used in better ways. So I do hope that we have some wildlife control operators out in our audience who are looking to help and participate and advance our industry's knowledge. But if you're going to do it and do it right. Follow the instructions that you have been provided by your research principal. And do it religiously. And understand in advance, it will cost you efficiency, it will cost you time, which of course time is money, so it's going to cost you money as well. Understand that going in. However, what are the benefits? Your name will likely, and you can request for this, be part of any publication that's done. Now, you're not going to be an author unless you're going to be participating in writing the document, right? But usually there's an acknowledgement section in a journal article or a publication where they can acknowledge you and your help with the project. And you say, well, what's that going to do for me, Stephen? Well, then you can put that on your website and say, you know, XYZ Wildlife Control, I hope no XYZ is out there, but XYZ Wildlife Control participated in this particular project, and you can sometimes provide a link to the journal article, and what it does is it helps give you the halo effect to show, hey, we're not just some hack out there trapping animals or removing wildlife. We are part of the scientific community. We are helping advance the knowledge of our industry because it's part of your corporate social responsibility. Is it going to be piling money into your company? No. But by building those connections, you now have a connection with a wildlife biologist. Do you think that you might know what their phone number is going to be? Not the one that's in their office, maybe their private phone number? Do you think you think when you send them an email asking a particular question that they might be able to help you? This industry is so connection driven. Who do you know? Who can you reach out to? Who can you contact? Who can you touch base with? It matters because information doesn't flow well in our industry. I think that's changing, but it's still got a long way to go. All right. So those are the two types of research that you can help with. Like I said, one is just simply providing some carcasses, maybe doing some surveys. But the other type of research is where you are getting your hands dirty. You are in it. You are performing the activity of the research project. That's a higher level of more time involved for your company, a greater commitment, and I hope that some of you out there are interested in that. Well, let's talk a little bit about, so how do you find these research projects? How do you let researchers know that you're available? And I wish it was easier, but it's not. So I'm going to give you some strategies to move forward with this, but I'm going to be quite blunt with you. These things are hit or miss in the sense that you don't know where that professor or faculty member or state biologist is in their work cycle. So research projects tend to be grant driven, and grants kind of sputter out at different times of the year. And the projects can be different. So they may be doing some research, but it may be on butterflies, right? Well, I don't know of too many wildlife control operators that are dealing with butterflies. Now, you may want to participate in that, which is fine. It's your business, but it's not probably something you're gonna be coming to mind by the way the researchers saying, well, I should reach out to wildlife control operators because they deal with butterflies. They know that's not true. So you have to kind of be a little persistent, and you have to be known, because memory in the wildlife control industry diminishes very, very quickly. Just for an example, I've been involved in the wildlife control industry now since the 1980s. And it is striking to me how people who are even, I had a friend who was doing all this research and he couldn't find what he was looking for. And I'm like, why didn't you just send me an email? And he forgot all about me. And we're friends. So I could have saved him a couple of hours worth of research time just by giving me a call. Okay, people forget about each other. So the same way with your professors and your state biologists, they aren't going to remember you. So you're going to have to find a way to be regularly present with them. That means reading publications. That means going to meetings. It means asking them maybe on an annual basis if you're interested in doing this. You have to kind of get those connections. One way is to kind of be in the loop a little bit is to join associations. For example, you may have to join a trapping association in your particular state because your state biologist is more likely going to be aware of the fur trappers than he is the wildlife control operators. You may not like to do that, but that may be one way to get an in because state biologists do go to state trapper meetings and will give talks and then sometimes in passing mention a research project that they're involved in. Or they may actually reach out to the trapping association to say, hey, we're doing some work in this, we could use some assistance. And there's your opportunity because you would then be in the loop sort of to learn about that. Of course, I've been a long advocate for state wildlife control operator associations. There aren't enough of them. I think only probably 15 or so states even have state associations of those, probably maybe half of that again are even meaningful. And by meaningful, I mean having regular meetings and they're active and they're trying to lobby their states and that sort of thing. And that may be high. I don't know. I'd have to recheck some of my research in that area. So it's going to take some time. And of course, you should have a state wildlife control operator association for a variety of reasons, but this is certainly one of them, where you can have those connections because it's easier for a state wildlife biologist or a land-grant university biologist to remember an association than it is to remember your name. You know, it's not personal, it's just the reality. I'm trying to just give you the reality of what that is here. I would suggest that you consider joining the Wildlife Society. I'm a member of the Wildlife Society, and they have an interesting professional magazine that comes out, I think, every quarter. And it will kind of give you some snippets of news around the country, and sometimes you'll find some interesting facts in there, and you're just kind of keeping abreast of what's happening within the high-end research on wildlife. And so, yeah, it's got a lot of stuff that's not even relevant to wildlife control operators. But there are some little factoids and tidbits, and it'll also give you access to names of people doing the research. So you may find someone who's like, well, we're doing research on XYZ, and you're like, well, I'm really interested in that animal. And then you can drop that person an email and reach out to them and say, hey, you'd like to participate, and maybe that'll happen for you as well. So let me just check my outline here to make sure I'm not missing anything. So I've talked about contact. Well, let me make sure I did. You want to reach out to your state wildlife fur bearer biologist. So your state fur bearer biologist is someone you want to have them know your name. You also should reach out to your state non-game biologist. You say non-game, well, because sometimes wildlife control operators are dealing with non-game animals. In other words, I don't know of anyone who's out actively hunting moles, for instance, right? So your non-game biologist, they get grants as well. Pittman-Roberts funds often are used to enhance habitat, and some of that money flows over into non-game areas. And so you can participate in some research projects that would be involved with non-game, and sometimes that would be animals that you're dealing with on a regular basis. So fur bearer biologists, that should be a no-brainer, right? Raccoons, skunks, but also your non-game wildlife biologist, and then don't forget your game biologist. So you need to talk to all three of them and let them know you exist and that you're interested in helping out, because these things, again, can come out of the blue. These research projects can come out of the blue, and you want to be on their short list, their memory there, if you're interested in participating with this. I talked about the Wildlife Society. That's certainly another way. And then you finally ultimately want to reach out to your land grant university. Or if you don't have a land grant university, your major, what is your, many states have one or a couple, in some of your larger states, a couple of major public universities. Now you can look at the private ones as well, and I would certainly encourage you to do that. But you want to probably start at your state universities, because your state university will often have those connections with your state wildlife agency. Sometimes there's a mandate in state law, or state legislatures suggest, quote, put that in air quotes, or require state agencies to work with, whenever possible, with their state university. You know, that's certainly the case for the state agency I work with. It is, I believe the wording is strongly recommended or encouraged to work with the state university. Doesn't mean we're required to, but it means if we have a choice, if we have an option, the bias goes to the state university. So that's where you'd want to start. But definitely reach out to some of your community colleges and reach out to some of your liberal arts universities. Sometimes, especially the more wealthier ones, sometimes they have private funds that they're using because they're well endowed in terms of the finances that they have. And you may say, well, but I want to do something real. Well, understand that sometimes you're going to be able to help a college student trying to finish a research project. Sometimes those projects are quite small, but they can be rather interesting, and your participation with it may be something, maybe little more than giving that college student some technical advice about how to capture animals more efficiently. This has been one of the things that's really struck me as odd in the research field, and that is how many biologists are not using the best techniques to capture animals. And so they're really wasting a lot of time in their research because they're not using the best. I'll give you a story that I had. I was listening to a presentation from a nice lady who was doing some mongoose trapping in Puerto Rico. Now, mongoose is a invasive species in Puerto Rico, and it was introduced to sort of control another animal, and of course it didn't work out very well. So they're trying to eradicate it, and I think the mongoose also suffers from rabies, if memory serves, and they're trying to reduce their numbers, because one of the things the mongoose is doing, it's a voracious predator, is it's ravaging the local wildlife, right? So they need to get rid. She was using the old gravity door have a heart traps. You know, the 2-door traps that were back in the 50s and 60s? Yeah, she was using those. I was stunned to see that. And I asked her, I says, why aren't you using conibear traps or Coro traps? And she didn't even know that Coro traps existed. Now, this isn't an ad for Coro traps. My point is that if she'd have talked to some people who were wildlife control operators, or even fur trappers for that matter, she could have been far more efficient in her capture of these mongoose. And she would have been able to do a better job, get more animals, remove more off the landscape, save her an inordinate amount of time. And it just didn't happen. So I'm confident that this happens over and over and over and over again. So I want to encourage you that there's another way to participate in research. So let me go through the list again. You can participate with the research by sometimes just providing some carcasses. That's important. I don't want to diminish that. Sometimes you're able to participate in research by being a technical resource to help wildlife biologists capture animals more efficiently. Maybe you're just going to be telling the researcher where you found certain animals, and this is the part of the state where you need to work. That can be important. And then lastly, The highest level, of course, is where you are actually in the field, perhaps with the wildlife biology, perhaps not, performing the research where you're recording the data and following the instructions and submitting your results. I hope you are considering doing that. For those of your companies that are a little bit maybe more established, I wouldn't necessarily encourage this for a new company because you need to build your business and get your income stream going. But some of you out there, you're making plenty of money and your business is relatively secure and you have the capability and resources to do some of this work, and you're looking for an edge to give you a little bit better halo advantage and maybe a press release talking point that can help market your business even more because you're going after higher level clients and trying to really establish yourself as the master in your area. I think participating in some wildlife research can be helpful to build a halo and show corporate social responsibility on part of your company. And I hope that this is going to be something that you will participate in and that you will help further the industry, because we have desperate research needs to really advance our industry to another level. And unfortunately, other forms of wildlife research get far higher priority than what we need in the urban wildlife control area. And by urban, you say, I work in the country. No, we'll talk. That's why we sometimes use the phrase human impacted environments, right? We're not doing wildlife control in the middle of Yellowstone, right? You're doing wildlife control because an animal has bothered a person. That's what our work primarily is. And this is important, and I want to encourage you that if you're interested, pursue it. It may not come to anything, but you may develop a relationship that may help you in other ways, because these relationships are important for your business. So that is the money tip, if nothing else, from this particular podcast. All right, well, thanks for listening again. I'm Stephen Vantassel, wildlife control consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife. And so take a few moments, subscribe to our podcast, drop me a line, tell me how I'm doing. If there are topics you'd love to have covered, definitely reach out to me. Again, that's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. Definitely check out my website, wildlifecontrolconsultant.com. We have a lot of information there that can be useful for you, as well as some publications. And again, if you have topics of interest to you, or you want to maybe be on the show, definitely drop me a line and let me know. And even if you have criticisms, yes, I'll take those as well and try to improve the show, because we want to make a show that's valuable for you, informing you and enhancing your business and life. Because remember, this is living the wildlife. Why? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everyone.